Okay, so I am thrilled to introduce our speaker tonight. Tiziana D'Agostino is a UX psychologist, interaction design professor, and graphic designer with over 18 years of experience in the industry. She strives to create the best user experience that will persuade without manipulation. Tiziana earned her master's in media psychology from Touro University, and as a professor at Platt College, she teaches graphic design, web design, front end, and UX. Her presentations deliver key details for audiences to be mindful in their own designs. She has been awarded Teacher of the Year twice, and beyond teaching, she does freelance and consulting work in the industry. Everyone, please welcome Tiziana. Yay.
Hey. Wow, that's a really nice introduction. I'm definitely gonna keep it for my records. That was really nice. Well, hey everyone, hello. I'm so glad you joined us. I'm gonna be talking to you about a little bit of psychology as it applied to web design, because of course you're all designing for people. And if you want to have a successful experience, you need to understand how people think and how behave so that you can really help them out. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Yeah, sure. Share. Okay, let's see. Okay, everybody can see my screen. Yeah. And I'm not going to be able to see the chat very well as I go through. So if there is any big question, I know they're going to be taking notes, and you can actually ask the question at the end of the talk. So today we're going to be talking about psychology for coders, and I like kind of as a theme of the talk is don't make your user think too much, but make them feel. And this is kind of what we want to talk about it, because it's one of the things that's very difficult to remember while you're in the designer shoes. So she already talked a lot about me, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I did want to show this graphic because I know that there are some students here and some really young people. So I kind of wanted to show you that your career will constantly evolve. You can follow your interests, and you can kind of expand your skills and add more and more skills, and is always going to stay nice and fresh. So I think you picked the best career. So now when I talk about psychology, obviously there is a little confusion because there's so many flavors of psychology. And in fact, more and more get added every year. So you may have heard about some of them, like clinical psychologies or cognitive psychology or health psychology, military, neuropsychology, social media psychology. So there's really, really a lot. But for you as a designer and for me, the one that really matter is cognitive psychology, which is the study of how people think, behavioral psychology, which is the study of how people behave, social psychology, which is the study of how people interact with each other, and media psychology, which is the study of how people deal with media and how media influence our behavior and our thoughts. So those are the ones that really gonna make a difference. So if you're ever interested in learning more about psychology, I would recommend to focus on those 4 fields, because those is gonna be the most relevant to you. Now, the big question I get asked is, why should I care? So everybody has their own field, you know, psychology, psychology, but why would I care? Well, we need to care about psychology because, like I said before, you're designed for human. And therefore, you need to understand the brain. Psychology gives you a framework for understanding how users think and behave. It gives you a little bit of an insight of how the human brain deals with different design elements. And even more importantly, it predicts how a user will interact with a design. And the more you become conscious of how design works by studying psychology, the better you're going to be able to communicate, sell, and judge your design decision, and overcome any objection for your boss or your colleagues, and so on. Now, there is one other very, very important reason: money. So in fact, having the ability to understand what user really want and what they're looking for would allow you to create a better experience. And better experience means it's going to bring more customer, you're going to mean more loyal customer, maybe even evangelists that will give you a lot of free advertisement. So for all those reasons, I want to spend the rest of the evening until we are together talking about a little bit of psychology. So I want to talk about, first of all, how the human brain processes information. I promise it's not going to be a big, boring science lecture. Then I want to talk about how our attention is so volatile and how we get distracted so much. I'm going to mention how the vision is limited, how our human vision is limited, and also how mood and emotion can affect our behavior and our decisions. So I want to start by giving you a really basic description about the brain, because the brain obviously is what helps us making decisions. And the brain has two separate processing systems. Now, I say separate, but a lot of time they work together. Those were identified and named System 1 and System 2 by Daniel Kahneman in his very famous book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And he identified them, System 1 as being a really fast, automatic, is very emotional, intuitive, subconscious. So basically, is the one that takes care of a lot of decisions that happen automatically that you don't even realize. Think about you driving a car to work. You don't really think about how to drive a car unless you just got your driver license. You automatically go in autopilot, drive to work. That would be System 1 at work. System 2, on the other hand, is very slow, effortful, logical, calculating, conscious. Basically, System 2 is what you consider when you're thinking about thinking or reflecting or things like that. Now, which one do you think is in control most of the time, and at what percentage? Let me see. And if you guys can tell me, because I can't see. I cannot see the, let me put this. I can't see this thing. Anybody want to throw out some numbers? How much of the time do you think System 1 is in charge? What percentage?
I think System 1's the majority. I don't know by how much. If I'm throwing out a number, I'd say 70.
Okay, 70-30. All right, all right. Well, close. System 1 is actually in control 95% of the time. So that means most of the stuff that happened during the day has been chosen automatically. And it's been chosen not just because necessarily you learn, but you're using your emotion, your intuition, as well as shortcuts that your brain creates so that you can actually operate. System 2 is used only about 5% of the time. And interesting enough, even when you think you're using System 2, a lot of times System 1 is kind of sneaking in there. So why do I say this? Well, because unfortunately, System 1, that is in control most of the time, is very prone to error. Not that System 2 isn't, but System 1 definitely prone to error. System 2 takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of energy. It needs a lot of resources. And System 2 is responsible for what is called reflective cognition. Reflective cognition is basic combination of the art of reasoning, problem solving, decision making, all those kind of complex cognitive things. And reflective cognition is really hard. It takes a lot of energy, and energy for humans is very limited. So System 2 is lazy, meaning you are trying to save energy as much as possible. So every time System 2 is engaged, basically you get a little bit more tired because you have to use all those energy. This is what is called the cognitive load. So basically the total amount of mental effort that's required to complete a task that is complex. So involving information processing, which could be watching a website or dealing with an app or things like that. Now, cognitive load is necessary. There is no way we can avoid it. And this part of the cognitive load that we cannot avoid is what is called intrinsic load. So depending on what task you're doing, there is an inherent difficulty that you really cannot make any simpler. So it's just the way it is. And so when you have to perform that particular task, you will spend some effort. If you're reading a book, if you're a good reader, it's not going to be very hard work, but it's still going to take effort because you're going to need to focus. You need to actually read the line. You need to understand what you're doing. But this is the intrinsic load. You cannot make it any lighter unless you don't read. Extraneous load, on the other hand, this is where you have a lot of control as a developer. Because extraneous load, it means anything else that taking up the mental resources when we're trying to deal with a problem. So anything basically that distracts us. That's what extraneous load is. Now, when the extraneous load is too much, then we get into cognitive overload. So cognitive load is the effort we put in when we are completely overwhelmed. This is when we have cognitive overload. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you have too many books, even though this could perfectly represent my life right now. I am swimming in books. I'm a big book person, but simply means you have too many stimuli happening at the same time. And they can be, vision, it can be sound, it can be multiple things you're trying to do at once. It could be a never-ending to-do list, whatever that is. Now, the problem with cognitive overload is that cause a lot of issue. So if you have a user or a customer that is in cognitive overload, you will start thinking, you're gonna start seeing that you have a higher bounce rate for your website. Maybe they spend more time on your website, but no conversion at all. You're gonna, in fact, see a decrease of conversion in general. You're gonna have fewer customers that come back and be a return shopper. You're gonna also see that the customers start lacking some trust. And then you're gonna see the paralyzing effect, meaning a lot of customers, they'll be so overwhelmed, they're not gonna do anything. And as far as feelings is concerned, your user will feel overwhelmed, fatigued, frustrated, even angry, depending how bad the cognitive overload is. Now, if you look at this slide, notice that there is some text, there is a beautiful picture in there. It seems pretty simple. But compare this slide with this slide. Which one is easier to read? Now, this one is probably boring. There's really nothing going on, it's just a background and text. But as far as capturing the content and understanding what's going on, there is no comparison. This beautiful picture definitely is distracting me for trying to understand what's going on in the foreground. And that would be, obviously, is not as bad of a cognitive overload, but this is going to give you an example of what I mean. So there's a lot of things that increase the cognitive overload. Some of them are out of your control. For example, having your phone on your table apparently really distract you, even if you're not looking at it, just because it's close by. And then, of course, notification, your children are screaming, your dog, your pets, all that kind of stuff. You can't really do anything about it. Other thing that can increase the cognitive load, surprisingly, is your mood. If you're upset or in a bad mood, your cognitive load is a lot higher because, as we'll see, when you're in a negative mood, everything feels harder, even things that they're usually pretty easy, right? Another thing, it could be when you're confused. For example, let's say you go in a foreign country and you don't speak the language. Maybe you don't even speak even understand the alphabet. That will bring a lot of cognitive overload because you're gonna need to constantly look around trying to figure out what's going on, what language, and so on. Poor design also will increase the load. In fact, when we're talking about development and website or app design, is gonna be probably one of the biggest causes. So what are some of the things that will increase the cognitive load? When you have too many steps, when you have overstimulation, so much stuff everywhere, when you have too many options, so it makes it really hard to select, you have too much content, when there is an ambiguous interface, you're not really clear about what's going on, when it's really hard to find what you're looking for, when there is internal inconsistency, and a lot of other things. Now, if you look at this picture, you may think it's from the 90s, maybe was created originally in the 90s, but unfortunately is still very much alive. So if you go to applause-learning.com, you will see it in all its glory. And this is a perfect example of a website that will increase my load because I need to figure it out, where is what I'm looking for. You have multiple navigation bars, you have tons of colorful icons, and of course, you get a carousel, because how can you have a site without a carousel? And so you have so much going on that at the end, unless you absolutely have to purchase from this site, you go somewhere else. Okay. Now, this is to go a little bit more close to home. If you're using a PC, you're probably familiar with the start menu, all those like boxes that turn around, all those colorful squares. Now, it may look very nice and clean and organized, but in reality, I don't know what to look at. And in fact, I made an informal survey, and most of the people that I know, they're using a PC, they usually either never use this screen at all, or they close all the boxes so that they only have the stuff they really care about. Because right now, I don't know what's most important, definitely not Internet Explorer. But other than that, I really don't know, where should I even start? So all this confusion, all this like overwhelm will basically result in me not interacting with this at all. I don't want to see it. Okay. So how do you know if your website is overwhelming to the user? Of course, ideally, you would test it with real user, because remember, you know a lot more than the average person as far as technology is concerned. So, but just some question that it will tell you if the customer used them, they probably really confused and overwhelmed. Where is the home button? And this is a big controversy right now, because some developers like to use the logo as a home button, and I've been guilty of that. But apparently, based on the latest research, most users would like to see a physical word that say home, give a sense of security. Then maybe you don't know if that's a button or not. And maybe, again, maybe because there is no home button, you're really concerned, what if I click the wrong button? Am I ever going to be able to go back home? How do I save this? Is this an ad or is the button? What should I do next? Will the data be gone if I refresh the page, or will it save it? Did it work? Which is another big problem. If I do an action in real life, let's say you drop a book, there is an immediate feedback loop. You hear a noise, you probably see something moving, you know something happened. But too many websites don't tell me that something happened. So I have no idea if my action actually has some consequences. So maybe it happened to you before to pay twice because you didn't know if the payment went through the first time. I know I did. So those are some of the questions, obviously, but when you start hearing your customer asking similar questions, that means your site is too overwhelming. Now, there's a few things you can do. First of all, use conventions. What that means is convention as far use icons that everybody's familiar with. So apparently, those particular icons are considered somewhat universal. I don't know if I agree or not, but that's what was considered. But if you look at the shopping cart, right, or the shopping bag, those are pretty familiar. You know what they mean, right? And you, oh, sorry, my mouse is going crazy. Sorry. You know what they mean, and you know what they're doing. And generally speaking, you probably also know where they are located on the top right. Now, why did I put a red cross next to the one on the top? Apple. Because again, Apple want to be very different and very creative. But for someone that's not very used to website, that does not look like a shopping bag or a shopping cart at all. It is positioned in the right place, so you can figure it out. But again, that means that I have to think. So other thing it would be, of course, behaviors. For example, your scroll bar. If you have a scroll bar, you're expecting that the page will move up or down when you're using the scroll bar, right? If it doesn't, that would maybe make you a little confused because you're expecting to do one thing and it will do another thing. Another thing, and this is pretty much 100% in your hand as developer, shift the burden. Now, there are certain things that require thinking. Can you shift the burden to the computer instead of the user? Now, those two examples are a perfect picture of what I mean. So some site, instead of asking you for your address, your city, your state, and your zip code, they will ask you just for your zip code. From the zip code, they'll figure it out which city it is. Now, that seems like really basic, but that means that I don't have to write or select 2 more fields. And this is really easy to do code-wise. Now, of course, I don't know the actual code, but I know that there are plenty of scripts that allow you to do that, because the zip code tell you exactly what city and what state. Same thing for the credit card number. The first number of the first few numbers of each credit card is unique. So all the MasterCard cards maybe starts in 43. All the Visa start with some other numbers. So you don't need to ask me to choose a card. You can figure it out via code, so that I only need to write the name, the number of my card, and you'll be able to detect which one it is. Also, if you have to do some kind of math, do it for your customer. Computers are amazing at doing math. People, not so much. As well as using smart defaults. So for example, again, in a form, let's say that 90% of your customer comes from United States and 10% comes from any other country. It probably will make sense that the default is set to United States. Of course, you can change it, but if it's set to the United States, that means that 90% of the people you're designing for will not have to do the effort, and only 10% will. If you don't choose any default at all, that means 100% of the people gonna have to do some effort, okay? And finally, provide good feedback. And we're talking about immediate feedback, less than 400 milliseconds. Why this number? Well, because it's been studied that if your system or a person or a system respond within 400 milliseconds, it feels like you're actually having a real conversation with no delay whatsoever. So it's very similar to kind of how you have a human conversation. Also, the feedback should not confuse. When you send me an error messages or you send me a modal window or things like that, the words you're using should make sense to a regular human. So not to somebody that know about technology. That's why I don't like defaults 404 pages, because even though I know what's a 404 page is, most people don't. And the default 404 page does not give me any kind of explanation. Before we move on, I do want to mention one thing. Now, brain, of course, are very different. Each one is an individual and each individual is really unique. But overall, people behave and react in the same way, which is why we're talking about psychology and we can't generalize. But there is one big distinction about type of processing. These names were given, I don't remember the scientist that first studied this, but in the early 2000s, he made a study actually for autistic children. But it basically defined that human brains can be defined on a spectrum between empathizer and systemizer. So what that means is that one group of the population are empathizers. So they like to make decisions more guided by emotion. They may be a little more creative. They accept a little more uncertainty. Versus systemizer are used to find solution to a problem. So, which is great, but not everybody thinks the same. Now, generally speaking, and this is absolutely broadly, but a lot of software engineer and developer are more systemizer. They like to solve puzzles. They like to fix problems. I love coding for the exact same reason. And maybe they may think that everybody else enjoy discovering something really cool and discovering the answer to the problem. However, plenty of people are on the other side and they want things to work. They don't want to figure it out. They want it to just work. When you turn on your computer, if you ask me exactly what happened, technically speaking, I have no clue. I could never build my computer, but honestly, I don't care. I just want to press a button and make it work. On the other hand, plenty of my students love to build their own PC. They choose the components, they put it all together. That's great. I will never do that. So very different brains. So keep that in mind and try to think that the majority of the people, they are on the empathizer window. Now, it's not really true, but try to consider that when you design, because it's better to be a little bit too easy than be too hard. Now, the second thing I want to talk about is our attention. So every time we wake up, every day we wake up, we go by our day and come back home at night, we are assaulted by millions of stimuli. We hear sounds, we see sights, we smell things, we think, we have decision to make. There's tons of it. Now, how can we pay attention to one single thing when there's so much going on? And in fact, humans are incredibly good to pay attention to one single thing. If I were starting talking right now, you probably will start hearing noises from your house, or maybe your roommate, or maybe your pet. But when I'm talking, you're not really paying attention to that. You're paying attention to me, hopefully. So that's what I mean for attention. So attention needs to be very selective, okay? And how do you decide what should I pay attention to? Well, the number one thing is your attention is goal-oriented. We pay attention whatever matters to us in that specific moment. If you want to learn what we are talking about tonight, you probably care about listening to the talk. If there's something else that matters more, then you will pay attention to that. Now, we're so goal-oriented that we actually will miss even things that are incredibly obvious. So for example, there's a very famous video, maybe you've seen it, in which there are some kids like throwing a basketball to each other or a ball to each other. And then the person will show you the video, say, make sure you count how many times they pass the ball between each other. Now, most people will pay attention to the ball and they focus on those kids moving around the field and passing the ball around. They're so focused on counting how many times they pass the ball that most of the people will miss when a person dressed up as a monkey or as a gorilla, actually, will walk in on stage, beat their chest, and move away. And I can give you the link and you can try yourself. And a lot of time, even when you know the trick, if you haven't seen it for a while, you still not gonna notice the gorilla, which is something that, of course, you will notice right away. If you're walking down the street, there is a guy or a woman dressed up as a gorilla beating their chest, you definitely will notice, right? But that's what I mean. When we're focused on something, we're focused on a goal, we ignore a lot of other things going on. We also have a very short-term attention. So that means we are very easily distracted, either by external stimuli or internal. I think we daydream something like 80% of the time in our day, something like that. Because again, we're constantly distracted. And finally, we're guided by vision. So our eyes decide what's important and what's not important, and decide to filter among all the stuff around you. It will decide, okay, you need to pay attention to that specific thing, not to all this other stuff. So how do you capture this attention? It's so fickle and so volatile. So there are basically two things you need to do. First, you have to attract the attention to begin with. But once you have your attention, if you want to keep it long term, you need to isolate that attention from anything else is going on. So to attract attention, for example, you can use good contrast between elements. You can have little surprises or what is called delighters that will surprise your customer. You can use very friendly language. You can use personalization. You can use humor. All those things will attract attention because they're a little bit different than what we see all the time. But once you have my attention, that's not enough. You need to make sure I stay with it. So you want to make sure you have nothing else to distract me. So for example, make sure you reduce motion. In fact, if you can avoid it, that's even better. Make sure your interface is simple and uncluttered, so I don't start looking at something else. Focus on only one main thing. You probably heard it before, you should only have one call to action, or at least one really big one and smaller one later on. Use a good hierarchy. So all those things would allow you to first attract attention and then retain it. So for example, in this website, which I really like, is a company I really like, notice that they're using a lot of things for attracting my attention. The first thing I see is a big hello, Tiziana, which obviously is me because I'm logged in. The other thing that that you notice, and is really hard to see, let's see if I can show it to you guys. Let's see. is a little surprise. So when you actually go to the website, let's say I want to add this to my cart, check out what happened to both the button and my item. So when I click add, notice that I have a little checkbox and then the item get added to the cart. It's like add, and you will have a little checkbox. When you go inside, for example, let's see that I'm going here. If I added a cart here, not only get added, but you also say, hey, naturally. Or then you will say, so smart, or so fresh, or things like that. So obviously, it would allow me to create a really fun experience because I don't expect it. Of course, I expect it to be, going into the cart, but I don't expect those little surprises. Also, there is a really good contrast. The first thing I see is this big hello Tiziana, and I can see all those other items are very well separated. And of course, the language is really friendly and is not formal at all. Now, how do they isolate my attention once they got it? Well, they're using a very clear hierarchy. So I can immediately see that, hey, seems to be the most important thing because it talks about, this is a subscription site, so it talks about my next order. There is no gratuitous animation. The little micro animation you see when you add something to the cart is very small and it disappears immediately. And also it's very simple and uncluttered. All those things will attract my attention, but also they eliminate any other distraction that could distract me. Now, this is another example. And by the way, you don't have to have all the characteristics to attract and isolate. As long as you have a few, that will be fine. So this is the website for Knock Knock Stuff, which is kind of a funny office product company, I would say. So they became famous for their pads, kind of like this one, when you can have a weekly spending tracker and the title is Where My Money. They make a decision, they have a parking violation pad, which is really funny. So the core of the brand is really funny. So their humor is definitely the first thing that attract my attention, because when I go to our site, the first thing I read is take doll out of adulting. So immediately trying to connect me on a personal level. There is an excellent contrast. The colors are very different from each other. The language throughout the site is very friendly. For example, even the search bar, instead of saying search, it said, what are you looking for? So a lot more friendly. The other thing that's really interesting, this is their favicon. So you will recognize it, first of all, because it's very unique, but it's kind of funny because a lot of their product, at least what made them famous, they were like either checklists or little pads. So it's very, very appropriate. It makes it very recognizable. As far as isolating, again, the first thing I see is what they're trying to attract my attention. Now, granted, they have a carousel, not a big fan, but it's slow enough that you can kind of see what you wanted to see, but there is a pretty clear focus. This part of the website is where they want me to focus. And also the navigation is pretty simple. Even though it's not a lot of like horrible color, I can see it very well because of those two lines that really make a special section just for the navigation. So your goal, it would be trying to attract attention first, but keep it, because of course, most people will probably spend about a couple seconds on your website before deciding if they want to stay or they want to go. And I'm being generous. Okay. Now, the third thing is your vision. Now, your vision is what directs your attention. So your vision decide, among other senses, of course, what you should look at. But your vision is a lot less good than you think it is, even if you have a perfect 20/20. One thing that is interesting about your vision is that you can only see in focus in a very, very small radius, right in the middle of your eye. The rest of your vision, even though it feels like you see everything perfectly, is actually like a blurry image. So your brain interpolate and make it feel like it's really, really sharp, but in reality, the only thing you can see really clearly is what's right in front of you. One other thing is important about vision is that we see patterns everywhere. We're optimized to see structure. Now, if you look at this image, maybe the first thing you thought when you saw it is like, oh, it looked some kind of sad alien. You have his eyes, his nose, a sad face. In reality, it's one of those things you look through to see in a distance. But the fact that you can see a face in something completely unrelated to a human tells you that your vision trying to see patterns all the time. And seeing patterns is important because it helps us to make sense of the world. Remember, there's so much to see, right? So we need to recognize patterns so we can see, okay, this is important, this is not important. The other thing about vision is that it is incredibly good at trigger memory, even memories that you thought you forgot. For example, the other day I was driving down the freeway and I saw this car that was a very unusual color. It was some kind of bright turquoise, not something you see all the time. So I look at the car and honestly, I don't even remember which car it was, but what it made me think immediately, what popped in my head was that when I was a teenager, I got as a Christmas present a beautiful boombox, and it was exactly the same color turquoise. Now, there was zero connection between the two things. I mean, we're talking about quite a few moons ago, right? And if you ask me randomly the day before, it's like, do you remember any of the boombox you used when you were a kid? Probably I would have never even remembered. But when I saw that color, that immediately triggered that memory. Also, it is biased. That's the other thing that's really hard to believe. But when we look in a thing, we don't necessarily see reality as it is. We are biased because we interpret what you see, especially if it's ambiguous, based on what our experience are. So based on my experience, I know that this is one of those things that you can look in and look in the distance, some viewer. But if you've never seen one, you have no idea what you're looking at. Maybe you do believe it's a robot. The other thing that bias is not just our experience, but also our context right now. If I'm showing you something, you're not really sure what it is, your moods, your particular context where you are will influence how you see it. And finally, your goals, because you're always going to pay attention to anything that's resembling whatever goal you want. Is also our vision influenced by what we see, our emotion, is influenced by our emotion. Let's say that you're either in a bad mood or there is one person that you particularly do not like. And you encounter this person and they have a kind of a neutral face or like ambiguous face. You can't really tell what they're thinking. Now, if you feel really mad at that person or you really don't like it, you are much more likely to see that expression as a negative expression. If you really like that person, you may interpret that expression as like, oh yeah, I'm seeing that he's just reflective, is not a mad person, right? Also, one other thing about our vision is constantly moving. You don't notice because again, our brain make up the brakes, but our eyes are never still. They constantly move from one part to the other, to the other, to the other. And that can be measured very easily if you do any eye tracking test. You can totally see how your eyes actually move. Now, because we're looking for patterns, you probably heard about the Gestalt principles of vision. Now, this is just simple principle. They explain some of the things our vision does. It doesn't explain why, it's just the way it is. So there are a lot of different principles. Those are some of the most common ones, but they're important because it may help you choose which graphic you want to use for your design. So for example, closure means that when I see this shape, I see a G. I don't see a bunch like this shape and then this shape and then this shape and then this shape. I see a G with something in the middle. The common fate is if I see multiple things moving together, I assume that they are together. Think about a bunch of people. You probably had the experience, you go to the airport and there is a big line and the person checking your document may say, oh, are you guys all together? And the reason they're thinking so is because we're all moving together, even though we are completely different people. Continuation is kind of the opposite of closure. Continuation says that you're going to see this blue bar as a bar, not as a little piece here, a little piece here, and a little piece here. Similarity, of course, that means you're going to notice anything that's similar. It doesn't have to be the same exact letters. It could be the same color. It could be the same shape. there's a lot of different ways you can be similar, right? Now, the figure ground is when you have one element that you can tell is in the front and one element that you can say in the back. So you kind of how you distinguish between two overlapping shapes. Now, that can change depending on which shape they are, but that means that you can distinguish between one main and one background. Proximity, of course, everything that's together is perceived as being together. And this is really, really important because when you design, it's going to be up to you to make sure you understand how the grouping works. So how can we help our human vision that is so weak, quote unquote? Well, first of all, you want to structure information in a really logical way. If I look at this particular design right here, I don't really have any question about what belongs together. It's pretty obvious. It's pretty obvious that this is one block and this is one block and this navigation is one block because they're all next to each other, right? So, and that's what you learn in design as probably has visual hierarchy or organized content. The fact that there is a headline that's bigger than the rest of the text to tell me that probably that's more important than the actual content. There is a good figure ground, have no question which object is in the front. Also, there are no contrasting color for the most part. And the colors are distinguished by both hue and saturation. So notice that they use mainly red and they use in a much lighter hue here than they use, for example, in here. And of course, one other really important thing to remember is that not everybody can see in the same way. Plenty of people, almost 8%, 8 to 9% of men have some kind of color blindness. Women only 0.5%. That means that they don't see colors like you do. So when you need to identify something, don't only identify by color, because maybe I'm not going to be able to tell the difference between the two colors if I have some kind of vision impairment. Okay. One other way you can help human vision, use Gestalt principle. Now, most of the time, you're going to use more than one at once. You're not going to just pick one. But for example, in those two examples on the left side, you notice that they both use in proximity, similarity, and figure ground. So target right here, using the same shape. So I know this is a whole similar group of things. You also use proximity. So those feature category obviously look like a group compared to the rest of the website. Because there is a strong contrast, I can see figure ground really, really well. And the same thing for the kind snack. Those icons, they look the same because they have the same style. So they don't need to be exactly the same shape, but they have to have enough similarity that they look like they belong together. And proximity, of course, same thing, as well as a blue background to include them all. Now, for this really basic form is the same thing. The proximity tells me what belongs where. Also, all the fields are pretty similar. And then you see the principle of closure. Notice that the word search criteria is breaking that line. However, the way my eyes and my vision interpret it is like almost like is a white box on top of an uninterrupted border. So it makes sense to me. Okay. Now there is one more law. There are tons of them, but this is particularly important for interface design. So when you have a lot of stuff, we understand things have belonging in category if it's sharing the same area. For example, in this case, notice that make a copy and email may be closer to each other, right, than make a copy and new. However, I don't think that make a copy and email are together. So common ground overrides, if you will, proximity. So because there is a line here, I interpret this as being a group, and this as being a group, and this as being a group. And I'm wondering why this is by himself instead of being part of the group. And then this is a group. Okay. Now, obviously, you don't want to go overboard and have a line after each item because it's kind of dumb. But notice the difference that the law of common ground makes in this interface design. So this was the old design. Now, assuming that you're scrolling the page and you don't see the header on top, you see the star. Who are the star referring to? Are referring to the recipe above it or referring to the recipe below with the photo? Now, if you look at proximity, the stars should actually be referring to pork carnita tacos. In reality, they actually refer to Mexican pot roast. But that's very confusing. It's not easy to understand. So this website redesigned, and actually that's what they did. By using the law of common ground, now, even though the stars are closer to the other picture, I can tell right away that belong to fish tacos because they have that white little box around it that's separated from something else. So it can really help for me to understand it and see better just by adding those little boxes. Now, of course, you don't want to go crazy and have a million different little boxes, but notice how much clearer it is. And that's why I put a little red X here and a green here. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is emotions. Now, mood and emotion influences us way more than we give it credit to. In fact, till probably the early 90s, I would say, most people believe that we make very rational decisions, especially for things like economics or financial things. And we only use our cognition and we are rational, we make your pro and cons, and that's how we make decisions. Well, it turned out that is absolutely not true. In fact, when we make a decision based on our emotions at that particular moment. Now, they knew that because they did some experiments in which there were patients that had injury in their brain, in the part of the brain that relates to emotion, and they were unable to make basic decisions like, what am I going to eat today? Because if you think about it, why did you eat the breakfast you ate this morning? Probably because you felt like it, right? It wasn't really a rational decision. You may have two perfectly good choices in front of you. You decide which one you're going to take based on how you feel like it right now, right? Now, emotions are crucial in design because you will feel something regardless. Either me, the designer, try to guide this emotion or not. I will feel something. And in fact, this feeling, this first impression is usually formed in less than a 20th of a second. Think about it. In less than a 20th of the second, I know if I like what I'm looking at or not. That's pretty crazy, right? And this first impression will last for quite a bit of time, even against evidence of the contrary. So your design choices will influence perception, your first impression. They will cause some emotional responses, and they will easily influence and possibly even shift our mood, and then also affect the ability to perform a task. Wow, you probably never thought about design has so much importance, right? But it is true, because what happened is that a good design put us in a positive mood. Even if it's not like jumping from joy, it's still a positive mood. When we are in a positive mood and we're having positive mood effects, our brain produces more dopamine, the two hemispheres talk to each other, we're more creative, and that means we can solve obstacles. So if we are in a positive mood, it would be a lot easier to try to understand a website than if we are not. If you ever find yourself in a flow state in which you're coding and everything works perfect, you don't make any mistake, you don't even know how long you've been coding because it's so perfect, that's exactly what I'm talking about. On the other hand, if you're in a negative mood effect, everything is harder, even the most basic things. I'm sure you all experiment one day, you were in a really bad mood, and what happened is that even things that were super easy, they felt really hard. That's a negative mood effect. And a bad website will be enough to put you in a negative mood effect. This is why you want to make sure that you always try to push your design past the usability and how well is designed, but to the emotional. You want to make that connection, because emotional design is what would allow your customer to become your fan and loyal customer. So emotional design, how do you do that? Well, first of all, trying to make a connection. Now, to make a connection, your user, you need to understand what they need. You need to understand their goal, and you need to remember you are a human and they are human. So you want to have a really human conversation there. Now, you can also add personality. Adding personality to your site and surprise and going beyond expectation is really what allow you to forge those kind of relationships. If you think about your personal life, why are you friend with your best friends? Probably because of the personality, right? Same thing for digital experiences. Now, you also want to inspire people to action. So you want to lead the user to satisfy the goal. Remember, you find out what they want because you interview your customer, then you can definitely lead them to solve their problems. And finally, show empathy. This is so important, especially during crisis moment, like a failure or something that doesn't work. Tell your user you understand them, and both with words and design. Show some empathy. Now, if you look at this, I know you're feeling something. Now, maybe everybody feels something different, but if you're looking at that website, you're definitely feeling something. Most likely not, you feel compassion. And this is done on purpose because they had this picture is very emotional and they have the word finding cure, saving children. Now, most people care about saving children. I'm not saying everyone, but usually that's something that affects you, right? Now, if you look at this site, on the other hand, obviously a completely different emotion. Now, if you spend a couple of minutes reading this, even if you never know this company, you realize that they have a kind of a, off the wall sense of humor. So in fact, they're called Despair Inc. and they create what they call the demotivator. So for example, this one says sensitivity, be advised, I failed the training. So obviously this side leads me not to be inspired, but to be entertained, which is perfectly fine. This site, depending how you feel about Apple, it may take you to an oh moment, or you can say, oh, I hate Apple, they're so pretentious. But either way, it will tell you something. It will inspire to feel something. And this is really the goal. Now, those are two examples of, something really small. Those are like little apps, but those alone would allow you to have a little bit of humor, a little bit of personality, and that will make you stand out from the rest of it. Now, of course, keep on seeing them like this on loop, it drives you insane. But in the regular app, you're only gonna show it one time, right? So quick tips as we conclude here. Number one, use heuristics. Now, UX design, graphic design, human computer interaction design, all those have a list of presets, heuristic, rule of thumbs. I don't care which one, pick one and use it. For example, this is one of the most famous one in user experience. There are the 10 usability heuristic, and you will notice that if you follow those, your interfaces will look already very, very, very much better. And again, this is really basic stuff, but you will be amazed by how many websites don't do this. They don't tell you where you are in a website, which is the visibility of system status. They using symbol that nobody ever used, or they use a model that doesn't really make sense to anyone. They don't let me to do undos or, press the back button. They are not consistent at all. So it's very confusing. They don't help me to not to make mistake, which again, this is a big sin for most sites. Also, recognition is easier than recall. Remember we said that recalling is a lot of effort. I have to use my system too to think back and find something. Recognition is immediate. I see a turquoise car, I think about my boombox. Automatic, I didn't have to do anything. Okay, so you should offer recognition more than recall. Obviously, you should make it efficient and flexible so that it can help both intermediate and beginners. You want to make sure that it's beautiful, because beautiful things are perceived to be easier as well as more trustworthy. And then if there are errors, make sure you can help them recognize and recover from them and offer me good help and documentation. So if you don't like that, there's a bunch of others. There are 247 guidelines if you really want to go in depth, or DON Normal 6 principle. Wayne Schenkenbarker principle. There are like tons of them. Okay, but bottom line is pick one. It doesn't matter which one, but that would help you to do kind of a little checklist so that your next project, you can kind of follow that. I said that I'm a book person and there will be a million books. So I was really good. I contained myself to 4. But those 4 books, I think it will give you a wonderful, wonderful view of psychology as it applied to design and why it matters. So the most practical one is Don't Make Me Think, as well of 100 things every designer needs to know about people. Melissa had both, I believe. And, but I really like the other 2 as well. So, but there are tons of them, and reach out to me if you're interested in a particular topic. I'm sure I can give you a lot of recommendation. Okay. And finally, I want to mention that while it's important to understand psychology and understanding what makes user click and how to attract their attention is great, but you only want to use it for good. There's way too much manipulation out there done with psychology, and that's really not what I'm about. I'm not trying to teach you tricks so that you can manipulate your user. I'm trying to make you understand that you can create a better product for your user by understand how they think. And my personal rule that I only gonna use psychology to design a product that makes people better, people's life better. This is a wonderful book about it called The Ethical Design Guidebook that, again, based on design and web design, and give you tons of example of what to do, as well as a bunch of other resources. So it's really, really great, great resources for you. And I just want to finish with a couple of examples of good sites and bad sites. So hopefully that give you an idea. If you're still good with time. Melissa, we're still good with time? Another 5 minutes?
Oh, yes, we're still good. Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right. So now this site, CatchNet USA, I think, is not horrible. It's fine. It's not too cluttered, but it's really bland. First of all, I have no idea what that is for. So obviously I'm assuming it's something about money, but is that a loan company? What is it exactly? And what's up with this, background, this big blue background? I love blue, I love orange, all color I enjoy, but it doesn't really tell me much. So check out their redesign. Now the redesign is not that much different, but there is a few really important differences. Number one, a person. And I know it seems like cheesy or cliche, but we are trained to recognize faces and to look for people, for humans. So adding a person, it really helps because it helped me identify, hey, I could be her, maybe, I don't know. So it made me identify, and I immediately drawn to that picture. Also, it will tell me exactly what they do. When you need money fast, be the hero. How cool is that? I want to be a hero, right? And then it would tell me, hey, I can give you a payday loan. Now, regardless how I feel about payday loans, the website is really well done. And again, a big apply now. There's no question what they want me to do. There is a very good contrast. If you have an account, you can log in right here, which is great because otherwise it was hidden all the way up here. And you still have the same, obviously this is kind of cut off. You still have the same 3 categories, but again, even the illustration look more friendly. So very, very small tweaks. But even with those very small tweaks, it made a big difference. Now, this one, I have to show it to you because you cannot appreciate how horrible the site is until I show it to you. So this site has so much going on that I cannot even imagine describing it. Now, this is for the University of Advanced Technology. So to me, it feels like, okay, maybe you worry about technology, but you don't understand about people at all. There's so much going on, have no idea what to do, what to look like. And even if I start looking at the website and see, okay, maybe I can figure something out, the constant motion and change of color distract me constantly. When I finally decide, okay, I want to find out, notice that if I don't pay attention to this little arrow right here and I start scrolling, just like I would, notice that it doesn't scroll down. I'm scrolling like I would normally scroll. I'm not doing horizontal scrolling. I'm doing regular scrolling, and it moves horizontal instead of vertical. This is very confusing and very not easy to understand for most people. This is, in fact, as a name, is called scroll jacking, I think, from hijacking a scroll bar. So I don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't know how it works. Maybe if I click a page, it will be better. But that homepage, most likely not, it will not take me to actually go visit the site. There's so much going on. This one is another beautiful one. This was actually my college portal on the university when I did my master. So not only is ugly, which whatever is ugly, but it's so hard to navigate. There's so many links. You have no idea what to do. And some of those links are very, very, very confusing, right? So news, I never understood what news were from because they were not really news from the world. So I never really saw anything here. And I don't think I ever saw any alerts either, okay? And by the way, this is a full navigation on the side. So I had to cut it off because it wouldn't fit. Look at that. Whoa, how insane is that? And on top of that, the first three links, home, my courses, and portal, well, my courses, I know what that is, but home and portal, it was so confusing because if you click on portal, it wouldn't take you here. It will take you to a list in which it will say, do you want to go to your home or do you want to go to your courses? So it's really, really confusing. Even after finishing up the program, I was still confused. Now, this is another one. And I'm sure they love me so much at USA Today because as I was going to take a screenshot for this site, notice this little box here. They say, we're always working to improve your experience. Let us know what you think. Guess what I did? I let them know exactly how I think about their site. So this site is just a mess. I can't see what's important. There's way too many choices. Everything seems bold, is very generic. And granted, USA Today is not really the most trustworthy news delivery, I don't know, organization ever, but it definitely is not helping me to trust what they're saying. Now, granted, they have a lot of content to show. I get it. But check out how CNN solved the problem. While it's not perfect, it's so much easier to scroll through it. Even the navigation is so much easier. Look at this navigation. This is such a mess. This is, by the way, is a menu, in case you didn't know. And it's positioned in a weird place and definitely not clear indication, okay? So again, not perfect, but at least here I can see what the main items are and I can see what is secondary and I can see where all the categories are. There's my sign in. So much more easy to see and definitely more trustworthy. And I want to conclude on this page because I feel this page is really kind of summing up a lot of the things that a good site will do by using psychology. So if you're not familiar with Lead Pages is a company that allows you to create a lead page or even a full website. But it's a drag and drop, kind of like Wix a little bit, but a little bit better. So when you go to their website, the first thing you see is this kind of change in image. Notice that it's not a carousel, right, per se. Images change, but it doesn't feel like a sliding carousel. So it gives a little bit on the novelty. The weird shapes, it definitely attract my attention because they're different. Nice organic shape, we, by the way, are very trendy right now. Very soothing color. And the first thing I read is create website and landing pages that turn clicks into clients. Pretty straightforward, you know, declaration here, right? I can start my free trial. And if you scroll down, you will notice that they're showing a huge variety of different people, as in different businesses or different jobs, so that it will tell me, hey, that definitely talks to me, because I'm sure there's going to be one of those that's similar to what I'm doing. Very beautiful breakdown here, very easy to read. There is an icon. I can see they're all connected. They're in the same area. lots of negative space. Be inspired by someone like you. Of course, I want to be inspired by someone like me. And by the way, notice the subtle picture of this woman pointing, and guess where it's pointing? Right here. So that we're used to follow either the gaze or the pointing of somebody and kind of read what comes next. And she's pointing right to this area right here. Lots of negative space, a lot of consistency, fonts are the same. And again, we don't mind scrolling if it is so nice and smooth like this one. It gives you a lot of testimonial, it shows you how it works, and everywhere there is those kind of nice, interesting shapes, those very soft colors, and you can kind of go on the whole way, and the whole page is really, really enticing without being over the board. And even when you get to the bottoms, like, hey, are you ready to grow? It's not like, hey, try our product. Are you ready to grow? Let's get started. Of course, I want to get started, right? So it's very, very, very persuasive. And I want to leave you with that. And I want to thank you for listening. Hopefully it was informational, and hopefully you learned something. Do you guys have any questions? Let me go back to Zoom. Where's Zoom? Anyone? Stop sharing. There we go. All right. Okay.
Will you be sharing your slides or maybe
Yes.
resources later?
Yes,
That'd
I
be
will
great.
save it as a PDF, and I'm gonna send it to you. You can share wherever way.
Okay. Yeah, I'll probably share it on the Slack. So
Okay.
I'll add the link tree in the chat for everyone if they'd
Okay.
like to join.
All right. That's great. That's great.
It looks like we have our first question
Okay.
from Jody. Are there best fonts to use?
I would say that there are no best fonts. However, there are appropriate fonts. So each fonts have a personality, and therefore you should use the right font for your project. So if it's like a bank, you don't want to use something that looks handwritten for the most part, unless it's a really fancy script. And I think the most important thing when you're talking about font, it needs to be easy to read. It needs to be big enough. And there is a big trend right now to have the typefaces to be pretty large and a nice, beautiful leading, like spacing between line. So that's one thing that will make most fonts legible. As far as the website is concerned, I would say trying to stay away from any font that have a very small X height. So that basically they look on almost squash, they're very tiny. That's make it really hard to read. And don't use hobo. That's it. Don't use hobo ever in anything. The most ugly font in the world. So
I love strong feelings about fonts.
you have strong feeling about fonts. What's your feelings?
The papyrus is probably like my least favorite thing I've ever seen. But also I feel like I'm that person who, when something goes back to the system font, right? And like, let's say that the font file is not loading on a website, I'm like, oh, what has happened?
Right. I found a way to kind of going around to that. I found a way to kind of give it up and say, okay, I will definitely define most of my body copy on a website or an app as sans serif. So even if, and I'm usually I use Google Fonts because I like it better than Adobe. I don't like either one of them. But if I had to pick between two evils, I would rather use Google. And Google has really, really nice fonts. And there are a lot of sites that have actually very good font combinations. So if you're kind of stuck, I'm trying to remember where I have it. Because there's some really, really cool sites that show you how to combine fonts together. And that's always, in my opinion, is something that is really, really cool. Because sometimes you don't know where to start. Remember how I was talking about how hard it is when you have too many choices. So Google is a perfect example of that. So there are way too many fonts. Sometimes you don't know where to start. So let's see if I can find it, so then I can share with you guys, because those two sites, I really, really like them. Let me see. I think it was under resources. Sorry, just trying to go back to my resources folder to see if I can find it. Let me see more. Google, where are you?
We did get another question.
Okay, go ahead.
If you can answer while searching.
Yes, yes, for sure.
Overwhelm you.
No, that's fine.
So we have another question from Estefania, and she's asking if for UX designers with experience, what would be your advice to stay updated and not forgetting the basics?
Let's see. Best advice. Personally, I mean, I'm biased, obviously, because I love psychology. But I would recommend adding a little bit of psychology to your skills. Obviously, you still wanted to keep on, working and doing project, but adding a little bit of psychology, I think it really gonna help, because he added the extra that not everybody have. There is a great site, I believe it's called grow.design. Let me see if that's the one. They actually have a really good, they have a really cool case study, and they are actually combining UX with the psychology. So when you look at their case study, they will point out the psychology point that apply to that. So it was like, hey, psychology insight, and it's all like cartoon based, which is really funny. So it's a great site. I just put in the chat. It's growth.design. The other, the first one is one of the links that I was telling you about for Google Fonts. I'm gonna put another one that I really like. Both of those sites I really like, because not only they pair Google Fonts together, which is already pretty cool, but they also add something else. So one of them, for example, using classical art in the background. So when you scroll looking at the font, you get to see beautiful art in the background. And as well as the text they set their font in are usually quotes from artists or designers. So it's really interesting, just as a side. The other one is using Aesop fables as an example. So they're really cool. See, let me see if I can show you. It's probably easier if I show it to you guys. So can you see my screen? Yes, everybody?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Sorry, I can't see the chat. So this is the one, the fanbot.github.io with Google. And so he shows you for each of those pieces, it will tell you which font they are. And there is a link to download them. And you can read all the Aesop fables if you want to. They're always really interesting. And so as you scroll down, she gives you an example of like, hey, you can pair those two fonts together. Look how beautiful they look. And the other one is the one that has art in the background that I really like. So the only thing in kind of bombing that he doesn't tell me who's the artist is, as far as I can tell. Wait, let me see. Can you? Nope. It doesn't tell you who's the artist in the background, but it's still pretty. And he has these beautiful quotes. This is, for example, from Massimo Vignelli. This is from Paul Rand. So it kind of does more than just like, okay, pair this font with that font. And this one would actually go a step further, because he lets you download the font pair, or he automatically give you the code. So if you don't even want it to download, you just want to use it for your website, you can just click and you can just copy the link tag and put in your HTML. So those are really cool. I think that would be a nice way to pick a font if you're completely stuck. Oh yeah, maybe. See, that's a good idea. Let me see if he tells me in the for the art, it was if you tell me what image it is. Post template. Let me see. Nope.
They could have also, they could have also licensed the image,
right?
And then
right.
they don't have to get the attribution necessarily.
apparently looks something called reliablepsd.com, whatever that is, which I'm not sure. So reliable, we'll handle your code. I don't know. So I think, yeah, it doesn't have a name for like who's the artist is. So, and it just have a bunch of numbers. So, but that was a great suggestion. Thank you. I definitely could image search on Google. I just don't have the time or desire to. Which actually goes perfectly with our conversation, because remember how I talk about cognitive load? You have to consider that sometimes people don't have the desire to do it. They may do it, they may be able to, they just don't want to. So and sometimes that's why if you don't make it really easy for them, they may just say, you know what, too much of my effort, I'm gonna go somewhere else. Cool.
I have a question for you.
Please.
I'm curious. I once had the opportunity to work with some UX content strategists.
Oh, cool.
I was curious. You did mention how the verbiage on all of the sites was very important.
Yes.
How can teams who don't necessarily have UX writers or content strategists, how can they help optimize their copy when it's not necessarily something that comes natural to designers or developers?
So, you know, I'm going to tell you there are 2 really good books about it. So I apologize. I'm a huge book nerd. So, but there are, you can probably find also a presentation online, but there is a really good book called Strategic Writing for UX Writing. And she actually goes step by step on her process, how she starts and how she ends. So I really, really like it. So I think it's called Strategic UX Writing, I believe. And she's, if you find her, she has a lot of videos. So I'm sure you can, like, I listened to one of her presentations. So I'm sure if you don't like reading books, you know, which I get it, and one of the weird one. There are a lot of videos as well. So she has an interesting name, so it's really hard for me to remember it. Tori Podmajersky. I am so sorry, because I'm sure I killed her name. For copyright images, where do you put credit license into the website? Really much depend on the project. For my presentation, for example, I put the credit right on the photo. So, so it's right there. You can also have an actual credit page. I saw that done as well, in which, you know, they were showing, and in my opinion, the best way to do it, it would be to have a small thumbnails of the picture and the credit next to it. Just to be fair, so that you understand exactly which picture it is. That's what I would suggest. Because I'm a strong believer in copyright. And I'm a strong believer that if some, you know, I even credit Unsplash artists, even if you don't have to, because I feel it's fair. They offer the free work. So I think it would be nice. All right, go right ahead, lazy man, unless there is any other question. I love your lazy man. Go ahead. You need to unmute yourself. Can they unmute themselves?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can.
Okay, awesome.
So I was just saying, I really liked your presentation. It was so nice. So I noticed one thing that was very interesting about the driving part you mentioned. So everybody loves the driving part, right? Everybody loves driving. So the way I see driving is like it's a greatest communication has already happened between the 2 greatest architects. No, I'm seeing as 2 minds, the one who designed the road, the one who designed the car. So the communication has happened, and 90% of the job done there. The thing we do the driving is just the support job you're doing. Just the 10% of the communication. You observe the road design. There is the road is properly designed, the angles, and the car is designed the way it should be moving on that. So a lot of communication happened. So if you apply to IT as an architect, how I saw this is between the user and the architect, that communication has to happen.
Correct.
And that 20% of job is done. That's it. If the greatest communication happens in the first place, later part is that 10% of job. So that's how I see, and I really enjoy driving. I first be thankful to those two minds, the greatest minds. So that's what to really share with you guys.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for sharing. You obviously don't drive in San Diego, because then you would change your mind right away.
I mean,
people don't drive very well here, so it doesn't make it as pleasurable to drive.
No, I've traveled across the world. I've driven in different kind of driving. So there are too bad driving cultures in so many other countries if you compare to America. So you will have to visit other country to realize how good it is here.
That's true. No, I'm from Italy, so I can already tell you that driving here is a lot better than driving in Italy, especially in the South. Definitely, I get it. But San Diego's not very good, especially when it rains, because it never happens. So no, that's a great point. And I think honestly that applies to any project in general. If the communication happens at the beginning, and that means the UX people, the designers, the software developer, the coders, if that happens throughout the project, you will get a lot better results, and you don't have to worry about it as much. You don't have to go back and fix it. But unfortunately, it's not always like that. And sometimes, developer and designer are in completely different countries. And so it's like it's really hard to communicate when you're so distant. Great.
Tiziana, we have about 5 minutes.
Okay.
So would you like me to share your information if people want to reach out to you?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes.
We'll share that in the chat.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. And it's going to be in my last slide anyway. So you can find it there as well.
Melissa, how are we only going to be sharing the slide deck within our Slack group?
I think so, or I could put it also on the meetup page, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure if people can view past events.
Well, I mean, I can also, if you want, I could also host it on my site and give you the link if that's easier.
Okay.
So then you can decide. Of course, lady man. So you can decide what you guys want to do. So you can either download it and share as a PDF, or you can, you can just look it up online. So just let me know what you think is easiest. I'll be happy to do that. How do you deal with displaying ads? Ooh, that's a good question. When you design a website, and if the revenue play an important role, how do you deal with that challenge? Well, there's one thing I need to mention that I didn't say in the presentation, but there's something called banner blindness, which means that people by now are so used to have ads on website that they completely ignore them. So that's one of the big problems, that the traditional places when you put ads is completely ignored. But if you absolutely have to have ads, what I would request, is please make it easy to dismiss, because that's one of the things, one of my huge pet peeves, and I think is very unethical, especially on mobile sites, when it's like almost impossible to close a banner ad and then you end up clicking on the ad. And to me, that's really unethical. So if you absolutely have to have it, my recommendation, it would be, if you had to have an ad, make it decent looking so that people will be attracted by it. Because people ignore most ads unless they're very different. So if you want to see a great example advertisement, go to WeTransfer.com. They doing an amazing job at doing that, because granted, they can't afford to do it because of the way their service is a file transfer service. So their app is just a little tiny piece of the screen, and the rest of the screen is either advertisement or display for art. And that's a great way, in my opinion, to show ads, but I understand not every site can do that. So yeah, yes. And by the way, the teeny tiny X are there on purpose. It's not a mistake. So that's why I say it is very unethical, because the whole banner is clickable and the tiny X is right on top. So if you miss it, you're gonna click on the ad. So really, really, and nobody really care about those ads. So I'm hoping that they find a different way. Like branded content, in my opinion, is a better choice than having ads.
So we need that. What is it?
absolutely. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
48 by 48 pixel.
Right,
pixel.
right. Yes, yes. So 100%, 100%. So, and it's just weird. And it's
Right.
weird. All right. Awesome. So if you want to continue a conversation, feel free to link to me. I think she put all the contact info. Please write, if you want to connect with me, let me know. Who are you? So, because I have so many people requesting like, oh, I want to join my network and I have no idea who they are. So even like a line is like, hey, I was at your presentation and I would like to connect, or I would like to discuss more, or whatever. At least I know who you are. Cool. I'm glad it was helpful.